So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about social psychology today. So how many of y'all have had social psychology? Okay, all right, so quite a few of you in here have had social psychology. Since it's a course that you can pick between like 3 different classes, I typically will get a few people who have not encountered social psychology in a variety of different areas. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things first that actually started social psychology. And in doing that, I've got a couple of activities for you to complete, and then we're going to talk about these. So I've got a jar of candies here, and I would like you all to go through and decide how many candies you think are actually in this bowl. So I'm going to start here at the back. If you'll just look at them and then pass them on, you can write down the number of candies that you think are in here. And then we'll talk about that in just a second. And then I've got one more thing for y'all to do. I have a piece of paper here, and I will need you to put your name, your address, and your phone number on these slips of paper, and then turn them back into me in just a second. So if you'll take one and pass it around. Okay, so social psychology is something that we tend to think about in a variety of different realms. So how many of you know what event actually took the place of the first formation of social psychology? Does anybody know what event happened that basically started the idea of researching social psychology? Yes, it is. Why is that?
Because the Nazis were crazy.
Okay, so in fact, I mean, that is a great answer, because the thing about this is that social psychology was something that we started looking at more in depth after what took place with Nazi Germany. And so what happened was the people who had been involved in the Nazi regime, we started thinking, are people in Germany just really bad people, or is this something that we could actually see taking place among other groups? And so the idea started with that, and we thought, okay, a lot of people said, oh, you know what, probably the people in Germany were just really bad people. That is not the case. It is not the case that the people in Germany were all bad. It's the fact that people tend to do things that other people have told them to do because of authority, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But I want to talk a little bit about what social psychology is. So if we look at this definition here, I want to make note that this picture shows sheep, which is a herd animal. So have you ever been in a rodeo or something like that, and you've seen them separate a cow from, or a calf from its group? What happens to that cow or calf? It's very unhappy. It tries to get back into line, and it wants to do so as quickly as possible, right? How many of y'all have seen that take place? Okay. Here in Steamville, you probably have seen a rodeo before, but anyway, what happens with this animal is it wants to get back into place. So I want to give you an example of that. What happens, have y'all ever been to the airport and you've seen 2 lines? One person has nobody at their line, and then this other person may have like 15 people in line. Has anybody ever seen that before? And why are the people not going to that second line that's open? Because everybody else is in that line. That's what happens. We do that over and over and over again. I just did this the other day. We were walking out, and I was in one of the buildings here on campus, and there was a whole group of people that were walking towards this one exit, and I wanted to walk towards that one exit, but knowing what I know about social psychology, I thought, you know what, it would be much quicker for me to go this way, but I felt like I wanted to follow the group, and I wanted to follow those people and go out that one exit. And so anyway, what social psychology is it looks at how a person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by social groups. Conformity is a big part of social psychology. So I need some volunteers to answer a few questions with me. So I need about 6 people. So who would like to volunteer to do this? It's really easy. Okay. All right. So if you'll, why don't y'all come up to the front, and I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions here. we're just going to go down the line. Okay. Let me stand over here. All right, so I've got a couple of questions, and feel free to answer however you feel comfortable. All right, so first question. What was the planet that's closest to the Earth? So we'll start with you.
Venus.
Okay.
Venus.
Mercury.
Venus.
Okay. And what are the 7 wonders of the world? Oh, how many you said? I skipped that question. You said that. I gave you the answer. Okay, Babe Ruth is famous for what particular sport?
Baseball.
Okay. And then, what is the world's tallest mammal?
Giraffe.
Okay, so next question, which is kind of hard to see here. I'm going to turn this. Okay, so probably I'll have to have y'all move right here so you can see this a little bit better. All right, so what I want to do is talk a little bit about these comparison lines here. So we've got our standard line, and then we've got our comparison line. What I would like you to do is tell me which one you think is most like our standard line, so you can identify as 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so go ahead and start. 2.
Line 2.
3. 2. Okay. All right, so y'all can have a seat. Okay, who here out of that group was here during the time period that I first talked to you all? Okay, all right. And so you were the only person that was not part of the original study, and you actually...
I misunderstood the planets question. I thought you said closest to the sun instead of closest to Earth.
Oh, okay, that's fine. This is actually what I wanted to talk about, because this is Solomon Ash's study of the standard comparison lines. And so what he actually does is he looked at the idea of how people conform when they're in a group. So when all of those people said line number 2, what was your thought about that?
That you're doing an experiment?
No! That's what happens when you're in a psych class. If I do this with my freshmen, when they first come into the psychology program, I get them almost every single time. But when you are in a class like this, and when you're in my social psych class, I can hardly ever get you. But if I bring in a person who's outside, I might be able to get them. So what is important about having all of these other questions prior to asking this question here? What's important about that? It does, because what's going on with that is I have established hopefully a routine with those questions, and the person who is standing in your position says, you know what, they got all of these other questions right. What about this one? So what happens is you start to question yourself, and this happens all the time, actually. People have these kinds of experiences a lot, and you question yourself because if the group says that that is the right answer, you want to question yourself. So I had about probably 3 years ago, I did this in my social psych class, and it was at the very beginning of the semester, and I had a girl who answered this question, and she said, you know what, I really think that line 3 is more likely to be the case. She said, but I forgot my glasses, and so I'm going to go with line 2. And so what did she do with that?
Excused.
Yes, she made a justification for that, which we do all the time. If we get something wrong, we typically do those things. Okay, so social influence is the aspect of when someone is influenced by the real or imagined presence of a particular person or audience. And so one of the really good examples that I like to use for this is when I had a student who said that his mother had instilled this idea with him that Jesus was always watching him. And so he came to college, and he was like 4 hours away from her. And he said that when he would go out and he would want to have drinks with his friends, he said that he always had this idea in the back of his mind that his mother would be saying, what would Jesus do? What if he was standing next to you? And so he had this idea, even though that she was not there, that was something that really influenced him. Okay, and then conformity is changing one's own behavior to match that of other people. Oh, well, that would help. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, dangers of conformity. I have so many videos on this, but this one is really interesting, and I'm just going to show you a little clip of this. So, how many of you all believe that if this room was on fire, you would leave? Okay, if there was smoke coming underneath this door, would you leave? Almost everybody, when you ask that question, will say yes, they would leave, because it's some kind of thought that you're thinking, you know what, I am going to leave if there's a dangerous situation. This is not always the case, though. So I'm going to show you a little clip of this video that Philip Zimbardo talks about, and I'm going to skip over to the actual experiment itself, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background information. So what happens is we have this group of people who come in, and it was just exactly like this set up here. We have one person who does not know the whole idea of the experiment itself, and then we have all of these other people that are involved in this experiment, and they know that they're safe, that this is just fake smoke that's actually coming out.
The place is rigged with 4 open cameras and 6 concealed microphones. And psychology professor Monica Abrams is watching from our control room, which we built in an adjoining suite.
Now it's just a question of sitting and waiting.
Right, so this is a questionnaire all about kind of shopping habits and everything. So just move that off your chair.
Our first participant is Mary Mizuno, a London student who thinks she's arrived early. What she doesn't know is that behind this door, there's about to be a serious fire in the hotel kitchen. Or at least the illusion of one, created by a smoke machine and some sound effects. What will she do?
She's now noticed the smoke and is concerned. At this point, she decides to...
Okay, so she is by herself. She has no one else to rely on here, and so what you see is shortly after she sees the smoke, she gets up, she goes out there and checks it out and then leaves. And so I'm going to skip forward to the group situation. So what do you expect to take place with the group situation that is going to be different from the individual situation? What kind of thoughts do you have on that?
Does the group know it's fake?
The group does, yes.
Oh, the fun's gonna sit there.
They're going to sit there, yes. What is she going to do?
Let's see.
Okay, she's going to look around, and you're going to see her look to others, because that's what we do. If we're in a crisis situation, we look to others.
behavior.
But what will happen to her script when we make a slightly unusual situation very unusual? Nothing to start with, so we get her attention. Now, how long before she dashes out of the room?
She's checking increasingly to see what the other people are thinking. But who can she appeal to? If the answer is nobody, she turns to the norm of the group.
Okay, in the spirit of time, I just want to go ahead and tell you what takes place with this. This person ends up sitting here for approximately 20 minutes before she leaves. And by that time period, what do you think would have taken place with that?
She would have died.
Probably so, because the amount of smoke that continues to fill up the room is something that's dangerous. And so that happens with conformity. Now, it doesn't always happen. Some people get up and leave. And so what you're going to see with conformity and the Solomon Asch study was that about a third of the time people will conform. So that doesn't always happen, because some people get up and leave. In this particular study with the fire, they had probably 4 or 5 participants that came in and did this, and one man got up and said, if y'all are not going to leave, I'm going to leave. And so he got up and left. And so that doesn't always happen where people conform to the group, but a lot of times they look for people who are going to be experts in that area, or they're going to look for people to actually make a move. Okay, so next area is formulating hypotheses in social psychology. So basically what the question is why do these things happen, and will these things happen again? And so social psychologists want to test these things and see if something like this is going to take place again. So I gave you 2 cases of the bystander effect. So who knows, since you've taken social psychology, you should know what the bystander effect is. What is that?
You see something, you don't do anything about it.
Okay, when you see something and you don't do anything about it. So what is associated with the number of people in the bystander effect?
People are less likely to say
The more people that are in that situation, the less likely someone is going to help. So I was at camp the other day. My daughter was at camp and I went with her, and this child started choking. And what happened was this person who was standing next to her got up and was like, oh my goodness, and froze. And so this child ended up being fine. She was able to swallow, and she was not having any issues after a short period of time. But this lady froze, and I saw her do it. And so I walked over to her and I said, hey, just wanted to let you know that that was the bystander effect. And she said, what is that? And so I told her about that, and she said, oh my gosh, that is so amazing and so interesting. And she said, tell me more about that. And I said, well, what went through your mind whenever this was going on? And she said, well, I just panicked because it's never happened. And I said, well, probably what was going on in your mind as well is that there's probably a nurse here. A nurse is more qualified to do this. So I would be likely to expect that the nurse is going to take care of that because that person's been trained. And so the bystander effect is the aspect of thinking that someone else is going to step in and help. So one of the most famous cases associated with this is called the Kitty Genovese case. And if you've taken social psych, you know, you've heard about this. So basically what happened is Kitty Genovese was murdered in an alleyway, and 38 neighbors did not, they said that they heard what took place, but they did not respond to the murder. It was in New York, and so tons of people said, well, what really was taking place is it was New York. New Yorkers are hard to this particular thing. They've seen it. They see muggings. They see all these things that are associated with violence, so they don't care about that. That's not really true. Has anybody been to New York? Okay. Did you find that to be true, that New Yorkers were cold and they didn't care about anything? I didn't either. I did not find that to be the case. Everybody was really friendly to me, and so that is not the case. Why did these people not help? Why did they not call? They thought somebody else was going to call, and they also thought that it was something they didn't want to get involved in. Because if you call, what's going to happen if you call and report that murder or that violent act taking place? You're involved. You're going to be testifying. You're going to have all of these extra responsibilities that people oftentimes say, well, somebody else can do that. Even if this takes place over a long period of time, so if this murder took place for 20 or 30 minutes, people still did not get involved. And that's really sad. So social psychologists look at this. They want to see why people don't actually get involved. The second case that I wanted to share with you is it happened in 2011. It was a 2-year-old girl that was hit by a car. She was struck by a car, and dozens of people walked by. It was on video, and they didn't see her actually get hit, but she was laying on the ground, and nobody stopped to help her. Why would you think that that would be the case? Okay, so someone else's kid. But think about what happens to a 2-year-old. Do you ever see them on the ground at Walmart having a fit? And so somebody could have thought that this was something else that was taking place. This is something that they study a lot. They actually do experiments where they'll have someone laying on the ground and having a seizure, like a fake seizure, and they study this. And so time and time again, people a lot of times do not help. And I think that that's really interesting and really sad at the same time. But what you also see is that if it's less than a big group of people, then you're more likely to help. If it's just you that walks up on this accident, why would you be more likely to help?
Because there's no one else to do it.
Because there's no one else to do it, and you're the one that's responsible for it. Okay, next area, moving into groupthink. And so groupthink is basically when we go with the way that the group thinks. We look at cohesiveness rather than the facts and realistic aspects of the actual idea itself. And so if we think about groupthink, look at some of the characteristics. I'm not going to go into every single one of these. I'll send this to Dr. Robertson, and then you can look at some of these things in this table. And basically what happens in groupthink is if you have a really cohesive group, Would you think that you would be likely to follow the group's ideas associated with a particular topic? The answer is yes. A lot of times people do. They follow the group's ideas because what happens is if you have a really cohesive group, you're more likely to follow the things that they say. And so these are some of the things that we can talk about a little bit. Pressure. So members pressure each other not to question the prevailing opinion. I always think about teenagers when I think about this, and I also think about people who are in cults. We're going to talk a little bit about cults in just a little bit. But people who are in a tight-knit group, especially if you think about adolescents, they tend to follow the group because they don't want to step outside. They don't want to feel like that group is going to be judging them or things like that. Okay, in group polarization is the tendency to take more extreme like opinions or make extreme decisions when you're in a group and in a group discussion because you feel like the group is going to back you. So what kind of incidents do you think that could take place with group polarization where you have a person or like who has this particular idea, the group shares that idea, and then they go out and they experience a particular event together, and they're going to be very cohesive and have this polarization effect take place? Yes?
Could bullying be
Okay,
part of that?
yeah. Bullying could definitely be part of that. And then mobs. Mobs are definitely more like polarized during the time period of like when they're in a group that, so let's say that I have a particular idea, like I am really passionate about, let's just say, I'm going to take our recent presidency. Let's say that I am really passionate about one particular candidate. If I go and I get this group together, I'm more likely to act a lot more like outspoken if I have a group with me. Why is that?
You have that reinforcement.
Yeah, you do. You have that reinforcement. You have these ideas, and then these people get with you, you get pumped up, and you're more likely to express your opinions in a much more in-depth manner because of this idea. Okay, and then group behavior, so social facilitation, so the positive influence of others on performance. So if I gave you let's see, if I gave you this particular problem here, so would this be something that would be simple for you to complete? 30 times 5, for those of you who are online. If I asked you to come up here to the board and complete this problem, would that be simple for you to do? Okay, what about this next one here, 200 times 4, and then my last one, 500 times 12. So if I asked any of you to come up to the board and complete this, this would probably be fairly easy for you to do. And so the social facilitation is positive influence of others on performance. If a task is easy and you feel comfortable doing it, this is going to be something that you're going to perform really well on because you're going to say, this is so easy for me to do, and the facilitation of everybody watching me do this, I can get up here and I can say, you know what, I'm going to complete this and it's going to be simple for me. What if I gave you another problem, which I'm going to go forward for the slide and I'm going to come back. If I gave you something like this, and I said, I need you to come up here and do this, even though this has the answers here for you, what if the answers weren't here for you? Would you be like, oh my goodness, but this would be really difficult for me to do? I wouldn't want to get up here and do this. I use math because I remember my 3rd grade teacher. She had this thing that she did like every single week, and we had to get up here and we had timed problems that we had to do on the board. I hated that. It was awful for me because I was not very good at math and I did not feel confident in that. And so what happened was having everybody back here and me working a problem, it might as well have been like this for me because that's how I felt in the 3rd grade. And so having everybody watch me, if you look at this idea about social impairment, having people watch me made it worse because it was something that it was negative influence of having other people watch me in my performance. But if I felt confident to do something like this, it's going to be positive. Okay, next area is social loafing. And it's when a lazy person works in a group and they perform less well in the presence of others. Tug of war is a perfect example. So when you do a tug of war and it's just you and another person, you're going to pull really hard because it's just you. If you are in a group and there's 15 other people on side A and 15 other people on side B, you don't have to work as hard. You're not going to try as hard. So this is part of social loafing. It is a physical example of that, but it's a good example of that because it gives you the idea of that. So I also want to make note that we were moving one day, and my husband and his brother were there helping move, and they asked me to help with a bed or a table or something like that. And so I went over there and I got on one side and I started picking up this table or whatever it was, and I picked it up and I realized that I was hardly doing anything. I was like, I'm probably not even lifting anything. And so I took one hand down just to see how much I was actually lifting, and I was lifting nothing. But I went ahead and pretended that I was so that I could pretend to help out with my husband and his moving. And I felt like I did that a lot, and I continued to do it because what happened was I felt like, well, you know what? I mean, I'm contributing, but I'm contributing very, very little. But my husband didn't know that. And so he was just thankful that I helped him move.
You're probably more of a hindrance than a help.
Probably so. But don't tell me y'all haven't done that. Okay, next area, compliance. There's a whole huge section in social psychology about consumer psychology. If you read some of these things, you can save yourself money because this happens all the time. And the more I've learned about this, the more I feel confident about going into a sales situation. So, door in the face technique is when a person comes in. How many of y'all have had a salesman come by your house? Okay? I've had Kirby salesmen come by my house. So, who have you had come by?
For home security.
Okay.
And some vacuuming too.
Okay, yeah, so Kirby or Rainbow, I've had several of them come by to my house. And door in the face technique basically means that they knock on your door and they say, hey, this vacuum is going to cost you $2,000. And then the person says, oh, no, can't afford that. And then they want to shut the door. Well, what happens with that is the person says, well, what if I made you a deal that you cannot resist? And so they say, we have a refurbished one. So what we could do is we could give this vacuum to you for $500. And you're like, well, you know what? That first offer was a no. The second offer was maybe a little bit better. Maybe I'll let this person come in. And then low ball technique is whenever I've already got commitment from you, and so I can increase the price. So when you go into a car dealership, tell them an amount that you want to pay. So say, I only want to have a payment that's going to be $350 a month. I'm not going 1 penny over that. What they'll do is they'll come back and they'll say, you know what, we got so close, and here we are at $370. That's only $20 more a month, right? You can afford that, right? And after you've already went through all the paperwork and you've already made a commitment, what you're going to do is you're going to be likely to pay the $20 more. How many of y'all have done that? I have done that myself. I have been there and I have signed the paperwork. I won't do that anymore. I'm like, nope, not 1 penny over $350. So save yourself money because this is a technique that they use. And if you pull out social psych terms during the time period that you're working with a salesman, they're like, whoa. It's actually a really great thing. I told this guy whenever I was working with him, I said, this is a lowball technique in psychology, and I'm not going to fall for that. You need to get it back down to $350. And he was like, what do you do for a living? I'm like, well, I teach psychology. And he said, oh, okay. And then foot in the door technique is the opposite of door in the face. They offer you a small amount at first, and then they increase it a little bit by the time that you get to the actual paperwork completed. So Dish Network, I always get something in writing whenever I do something with Dish Network because they have done this to me many times. They have said, oh, it's free to move. It doesn't cost you anything. Really? Because it does not reflect that way on my bill whenever I get it. And then they say, oh, well, you know, we could make some changes to that. And then they end up charging me money. Oh, that's not the one I wanted to go to. Okay, so next area, anatomy of a cult. So how many of y'all have ever heard of Heaven's Gate? Okay, if you've been in my class, you've learned a little bit about Heaven's Gate. So those of you who have, what is Heaven's Gate? Anybody remember?
It was the cult that believed that there was a spaceship coming to get them,
Mm-hmm.
and when it didn't happen, they all ended up committing suicide.
Okay, so this is part of conformity. This is why we're talking about this, and I just want to give you a quick case example about conformity and cults. So Heaven's Gate was led by Marshall Applewhite. You should look it up and read it. There's tons of information about it. There's also YouTube videos about Marshall Applewhite's discussions with the public, trying to get them to join his movement. So basically what he said was that the people were about to be recycled, and they were going to ride the Hellbach comet out to a new era, a new civilization. And so 39 people ended up committing suicide during the time period that the Hellbach comet was coming through. And so what he did is he had this idea of recycling them instead of killing them, instead of going through suicide or murder or whatnot, because that sounds much better. When you look at the word recycle, what it comes to mind? Reused, renewed. It's not something where it's the end. That person's going to be renewed. And so what happened with this is these people were involved in this cult, and he basically took away all of their outside contacts. He had them, they had lived in this compound. It was a very nice place, actually. They lived in a mansion. And these people really had very little outside contact with their family or friends. And the reason for that is because those people would probably try to convince them to get out of this cult. And so what happens is they make small commitments at first. He didn't say, hey, come join me, we're going to die pretty soon. He did not do that, because if he did, that would not be something that people would join. But what he did is he said, hey, this group is a group that you can join, and you can be loved, you can be a part of this group, we can have spiritual connection together, and then all of these things. And then finally what happened is years later this took place. It was not something that took place really quickly. And so leaving is difficult. Deprogramming is sometimes needed. The people who left that cult still talk about, to this day, the fact that they should have joined that particular movement. If you watch some of the videos about this, there was a particular man who comes on and he discusses things with the interviewer, and he says, I should have really left with them. They're in this new environment. They've been recycled, etc., etc. And so he still believes these things. But on average, this is not something that takes place. 90% of people actually leave a cult. So I'm just going to show you real quick the website associated with Heaven's Gate. It's still available. You can go to this website and you can see their ideas about what's going on. So he basically goes through and talks about some of the things that are associated with his website and what their mission is. There's some videos here, but you can watch more of them on YouTube. They're really interesting. And he says that this is a position against suicide. He basically said that if they didn't take their lives, then what would happen was they would not be able to continue in the life that they were in at that time period. So it was not suicide, it was recycling. Okay, obedience. So compliance due to the perceived authority of the asker. So I need you all to pass in those little sheets of paper that have your name. And
I never got one.
oh, you didn't? That's okay. Thank you. Okay, so did I get them all? Okay, for those of you who are online, I had just asked everyone to write their name, their phone number, and their address down. So I just want to make note, Nobody questioned me for this. Why would you give me your name, your number, and your address without asking me? Why? Nobody asked me why.
Because you're the instructor. You told us to.
Exactly. Exactly. So I came in and I asked you, I'm going to shred these, by the way. So if you were not one of the people who actually wrote this down, don't worry about it. If you came in late, that's fine. Yes.
I don't know if I should admit this or not, but I didn't actually put down all the information.
Okay. Now, I want you to admit that. Why?
Because it's not that I don't trust you, but I was like, wait, did she really ask this? So then I just put down my name and as well as my email because I mean, if you know my name, you can know my email.
Right.
But as for address, I was like, what's the real meaning behind this?
Did anybody think, is this part of the social psych experiment? Or did you think maybe she needs it because she's going to send me something? I'm not sending you anything. I'm going to go shred these right after I leave here. But I want to make note that I've done this multiple times, and I've even gotten someone to come in who is not part of this class at all. I didn't do that today because I wanted to save time. But I had this lady that I walked up to and I said, could you go into my class and do this and ask for this information? And people gave her the same information. That's kind of scary because you're giving someone your life information here. Like, this is where you live, and you're giving me this information because you think that I'm an authority figure, come in and I ask for something and then you give it to me. Well, you need to ask about that. Like, you need to say, hey, what is this for? Next time that this happens, ask about that because you don't know me. Some of y'all do, but some of you do not. Some of you just gave me information and now I have all of your contact information. I can come to your house. I'm not going to, but I could, yeah.
I gave you my P.O. box. I figured if you sent me something, you could go there. You don't even know where I live.
Okay, yeah. So is this interesting to y'all? Like, is this an interesting concept that we would give people this? I would probably do the same thing if I was in your situation. If someone came in and said, hey, I need this, before I knew about all this, I would do that. But we need to be aware of these things. So we also are compliant whenever we think about someone in a perceived authority figure, such as a police officer. If they walk up to you and they ask you for something, we a lot of times are going to do those things. I mean, for this particular purpose, because you don't want to be taken to jail or something like that. And then also we see it as a command. So those of you who've taken social psych and general psych, you should have talked about this as well. But Milgram's obedience experiment was conducted in 1961, and they also did it again about 50 years later. They wanted to see if that was something that you could actually do again, and they got people both times. So what is Milgram's obedience study about?
He pretended to shock people, but they sounded like they were in extreme pain, and he just said, please continue, and they kept, they kept bumping it up.
They will continue, and not everybody. You're going to see with this, about 65% of the people would actually complete the study to the end. So not everybody did this. But I just want to show you a little clip about Milgram's obedience study. And for those of you online, I will post this, and then you can watch that. I'm going to skip through here. The new study is also available on YouTube, and so you could watch that. It's basically the same impact take place. So,
cloud, horse, rock, house. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer. Horse. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please. Continue, please. Go right ahead. Let me out. The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor, and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're gonna get a shock. 180 volts. I can't feel the pain. Can't stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man. I mean, who's gonna take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
2/3 of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that photo then. I'll get no answer. He was hollering a less voltage. Can't you check in to see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent...
Okay, so going back to what I mentioned at the very beginning about looking at the Nazi regime, what does this show? What is this particular study that was done after that show about people?
Conformity is real.
Yeah, and people will do things based upon what an authority figure will tell them to do. Because why would he not worry about actually taking this to the extreme? What can he do? I mean, he obviously had some concern about it, but why did he continue to do this?
Because he got told he wasn't responsible.
Exactly, because he was told that he was not responsible. He said, oh, I'm going to be the one that's responsible for this. And so he continued the shock. And so at 350 volts, that is really kind of sad that this would actually take place, that people would do this. 65% of the participants would do this. And when they did this study again, the same results took place. People had the same kinds of things taking place. So as you can see here, this just kind of gives you the learner script and what they're supposed to be saying. So questions about that thus far?
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
So I always think that's a really fascinating study, and I teach on that in a couple of different classes too. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is I always thought, oh, it's because it's men, right? I'm like, oh, well, there's probably a gender difference. I would be really interested in knowing if there's a gender difference. There isn't. They replicated the study 16 times, and there's no difference by gender. There's no difference by anything. It is people, 65% of people will go all the way to the extreme.
Yeah. It's really crazy and sad that people would do this. I asked my social psych class in the very beginning, I say, do you think that you would do these things? And then most of them say, oh, no, I would not do that. But in this situation, you probably, 65% of you would. Okay, so moving on to social cognitions, attitudes, and impression formation. This is very broad. This topic in social psych is very, very broad. I'm trying to talk to you a little bit about the studies that are most prevalent in social psychology so that you'll have an idea for your tests that you're going to be taking. And then I'm trying to talk about some of the broad terms that you see over and over again. So attitudes. Basically, we look at a particular person and we see what kinds of things that they're engaging in, and we basically make a judgment about them based upon what we see and what that person is actually acting like. And so we respond to them either positively or negatively based upon those actions. And so if you see a person who walks up and smiles at you or waves at you or something like that, what kind of attribute are you going to give that person? What are you going to say about that person? Yeah, they're probably friendly because they're doing these things. It is part of the way that we assess the situation. So this gives you just a little idea about the components of attitude. So there's 3 different areas that we look at. So the actual cognition, what we think about. And so this just gives you an example about country music. Some of you may like country music in here, some of you may not, but if you look at someone's behaviors associated with that, you can look at cognition, affect, and then behavior. So the example is, I think country music is better than any other kind of music. The affect, which is the actual emotional aspect of this, I like country music, it's fun and it's uplifting. It makes me feel good. So behavior is I buy the country music on my MP3s every time I get a chance to do that. And so those are the 3 components about forming an attitude and how we judge that. So, oops. Okay, attitude formation. I'm going to go through this quickly. Direct contact, direct instruction, interaction with others, and then vicarious learning. So what's vicarious learning? All the other ones I feel like are self-explanatory, but what's vicarious learning?
Watching someone else.
Yeah, watching somebody else and learning from that by seeing what other people are doing. Okay, persuasion. I want to first talk about Girl Scout cookies because they're selling them right now at Walmart. I went on Sunday and I had a Girl Scout walk up to me. She was 12 years old. I know this because she's in my daughter's grade. And so I walked up, and I knew she was going to ask me to buy cookies. And she said, hey, would you like to buy some Girl Scout cookies today? And I said, I really didn't want to buy any Girl Scout cookies. And instead of saying no, just no, because I feel like that was rude, I said, well, I would, but I don't have any cash on me. And she said, we take card. And I said, oh, well, that's wonderful. And I said, that's really great that you'll take card. I said, you know what? I'm going to get my groceries, and then I'll come back out here and buy them. I thought that they might be gone by that time period. And so I went in and did my shopping. I was in there for an hour, and I'm like, this time period, they're going to be gone, because this happens to me all the time. I always tell people that I'll buy things, and then I get back out there and they're gone, or I go to the other side, you know. And so I do that, and they were actually at both sides, and so I just decided to walk out the same side. I thought, well, if they're gone, they're going to be gone on both sides. I walk out, and she was like, hey, it's me, and I'm ready for you to buy these cookies. And I said, oh, yes, here I am to buy the cookies. And so she said, what kind of cookies would you like? And so I said, I guess I'll take the s'mores cookies, because those are new, and I thought I might as well try those. And she said, it's a shame to buy just $4 on your card. Like, wouldn't it be better to buy $8 worth of cookies? And I said, yes, it would. And so I bought $8 worth of cookies after I had bought like 2 huge bags of Reese's, because I was not planning on buying the Girl Scout cookies. But anyway, persuasion, that girl had it going on. She was able to make this argument, and she was able to sell me 2 boxes of cookies. But she was able to persuade me, and I felt bad, because I was like, I told her that I'd buy them, and then I was trying to get out of it in a couple of different ways, and I didn't have that happen. But anyway, if we look at persuasion, there's a couple of factors here to look at. But if we look at the like someone persuading you into an area that you might not necessarily have gone, what kinds of things are important? So have you ever had anybody persuade you to a different opinion or a different idea than you originally had? Has anybody had that happen? And could give me an example of that? But you know that it's happened before? I mean, that someone has persuaded you to believe a particular way. Has that happened to you all before? You just can't think of an example? Okay, so we basically look at the source of the message itself, and then the target audience, if we're planning on trying to persuade someone in a particular way. And these are really important in doing this. So if you look at the Girl Scout cookie example, what kinds of things is she looking at when she's trying to target people? Well, first of all, she said, she looked at the target audience. It's really good to go to someone who you kind of have some kind of contact with. Like she knows that I am a mother of a child that is in her grade, because I saw her at camp the other day and she talked to me. And so that is, she's targeting me because of that. I mean, not only that, but there's other reasons as well. But if you look at this, you can play into each one of these areas. Okay. And then the elaboration likelihood model. So there's 2 ways that we can actually look at the message that's taking place. So there is a direct route, which is also called the central route of persuasion. And that is a term that you'll see quite a bit in social psychology. And it basically, like if I wanted to go to a message because it was important to me, I would go to that, and it would be something that would appeal to me because of the direct central route of persuasion. If you look at the peripheral route, it's pulling in other areas or other ideas that might be something that we might be interested in. So my example about that, if Matthew McConaughey was to give a speech on this campus, I would probably go because I like him. I think he's cute. I'm going to go because I like who he is. And so I would go because of a peripheral route. It's not something that I may necessarily care about, but I'm going to go because of that. If you look at consumer psychology, they use this all the time. What do you see on many commercials? Celebrities, people who are like famous, they use them a lot. Why is that? Because if the celebrity uses that particular item, maybe I would want to as well. All right, next area is cognitive dissonance. And So basically what cognitive dissonance is discomfort arising when a person's thoughts or behaviors do not correspond. In counseling, they teach this a lot. I mean, we talk about this all the time because your behaviors and your thoughts may not match exactly what the client who comes in to see you is having. And so you have to learn how to deal with these things. But if we look at cognitive dissonance, it happens all the time. So if I gave you... I'm gonna go to this activity. We're not gonna do all of these, but I want you to write down, like take out a sheet of paper, and I want you to write down your thoughts associated with this. So number 1 for strongly agree, strongly disagree, number 5 for strongly agree, and I want you to answer these questions. So poverty in our country is a serious problem. Is that 1 for strongly disagree or 5 for strongly agree? And the second one, pollution is one of the biggest issues confronting today's world. And then 3, freedom of speech is one of the most important rights that we have as Americans. So I just want you to tell me what you think about each one of these. Austin, are you able to see that in the back? Okay. Okay. Okay, everybody got something written down? Okay, we're not going to go through all of these things here, but I want you to, we're going to skip through this because we're kind of running out of time, so I'm not going to go through all of these right here. Okay, so I want you to think about these ideas here. Let me go back to the lecture. Oh, now I'm at the very beginning. I'm gonna have to go through this real quick. Okay, so when you look at the way that you had responded to that, how many of y'all said that poverty was a major issue? Okay, what about the area of pollution? Okay, so you said that that was a big issue. Okay, so how many, let's focus on the pollution question. So what do you do to reduce pollution yourself? Those of you who said that this was a major thing in our world. Yes?
I recycle back home. I don't do it here because I was told that Stephenville doesn't actually have a recycling center.
Mm-hmm.
But other things that I try to do is I'm trying to increase the amount of time I can go before taking a shower.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You know, in addition to the water, also the soap, all those chemicals going down the drain.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so you try to take a quick shower, and then as far as recycling, we don't have a lot of things available here in Stephenville. And so that is perfect, exactly what I wanted you to say with this particular area, because if we say that pollution is a big thing, and we say that Stephenville doesn't have any kind of recycling centers to be able to take this to, what are we doing here? Well, we are excusing the behavior, and I don't want to say, it's not trying to be like negative towards you. I'm just saying that's what we do on a regular basis. Instead of saying, well, we're not really doing anything to help it, which you are helping. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that what happens with this is we tend to excuse the behavior because we say, well, I would, but here is the reason why I can't. And so we do this all the time, and not just with those things that we were just discussing there. And so we have all these conflicting ideas. All right, and so we're kind of running a little bit short on time. I want to make sure and get through some of these things, so I'm going to kind of go over these fast. So impression formation, we make a first impression based upon the person's first experience with us. So someone comes in and they have, let's say that they have a bad date or something like that. We tend to make that first impression, and that we hold on to that a lot of times. How many of y'all have ever made a first impression about someone and you've been completely wrong about them? Okay? How many of y'all go online and you read the information about the professor on rateyourprofessor.com and it's not necessarily the same as what you think about them? You get in there and you're like, oh, this person's very different, either positively or negatively, because what you have read about them is going to be your first impression of them. So those of you who said yes, you said yes. So what has happened with yours? Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna say their name actually. Dr. Newby. He didn't have a very good rate, my professor, but his class really isn't.
Yeah. Okay.
And he had a lot of people saying that he didn't respond or something like that, and that he was kind of difficult. But in his class, really, it's more of a breeze. It's my easiest class.
Okay. So your first impression of him when you thought that originally from reading that information or what other people had discussed, did you go into it thinking, oh, this is going to be one of those classes?
I would have actually chosen a different professor had I had the opportunity to, but he's the only one who teaches the class that I needed.
Right.
But now, I mean, I'm okay with it.
Okay, so that's a great example because we make these impressions even when we have not even met these people. And so this is influenced by the primacy effect. So it is also part of social cognition. And social categorization, I want to talk a little bit about schemas. So who knows and can tell me what a schema is?
It's like a thought that you have and it goes with like flows.
Right, exactly. So you have a particular idea about what something is going to be like, or what a particular group of people are going to be like, or what a particular situation is going to be like. And so we have these ideas and they allow us to be able to understand new situations. And then, so stereotype, we have a typical characteristic that we have of a particular person. And so if we think about one particular group of people, one of the examples that I have in my social psych book that I use talks about how we tend to think that bikers have a particular group of personality characteristics. We have stereotypes about them a lot of times. And so when you see someone who does not fit that particular norm, what do we tend to do? We tend to be like, that's so weird for that person to be a biker because they don't fit the typical characteristics. And so basically we kind of throw those people out of that particular norm that we have, and we focus on the people who meet that particular characteristic. All right, and attribution, so process of explaining the behavior of others as well as one's own behavior. So there's dispositional attribution and then situational attribution. So if you know a person, let's say I'm going to take my mom for example. My mom is really not a good driver. I mean, she's just really not. She doesn't pay attention to things very often. And so if I was taking my mom as an example here, if she got into a wreck, I'm more likely to say that she's this person right here. Maybe a careless driver. He doesn't watch out for other cars. And so I'm going to take that more internal factor and not really blame it on the situation instead. So this other situation says he probably got into he got caught in some bad traffic and then he was late for a meeting. They're making up a reason for why this person would be involved in this particular accident. And so knowing the person, I'm going to explain it based upon what I know about that person. All right, and then prejudice and aggression. So let's talk a little bit about prejudice versus discrimination. And then prejudice is negative thoughts and feelings about a particular group, where discrimination is actually the treatment of others because they're different from what you believe is right. So this person here, how many of y'all have seen a person who is homeless? Okay, so how many of y'all have been to San Antonio and seen the homeless population, or Austin? Because those are the two places that I've seen the most homeless population as far as in Texas. So if you see a homeless person on the side of the road or on the side of the street, what do we tend to think about that person? What kind of thoughts come to mind?
That's so sad.
Okay, yeah, we'll think that they're sad. What else?
They did that to themselves.
They did it to themselves. What else? I heard lazy. I heard they're having a hard time. We tend to think particular thoughts about this particular person because we don't know their situation. A lot of times people think oh, this person's going to use the money that I give them to go buy alcohol or to go buy drugs or something like that. A lot of people think like that. Why do we do that? Why do we think that this person is involved in drugs or alcohol?
So it makes us a reason not to give them money.
Right. So we think, oh, if we don't want to give that person money, then we could just think that they're going to buy alcohol. And plus, if we've seen other people doing these things, have y'all ever seen the pictures that people are holding up that say, or actually the little posters that they're holding up that say, I'm not going to lie, I'm buying booze with this. Have y'all seen that? And do you think people are more likely to give them money because they're telling the truth, or do you think that people are less likely to give them money? So I've seen it both ways, because I've seen people giving someone money because they're like, you know what, that person's telling the truth, I might as well just go ahead and give them the money. And then I've seen people say, no, I'm not helping that person out because I'm not contributing to this particular area because this person is just going to buy booze with this, and then they're going to have issues with that. So types of prejudice and discrimination. So we've got in-group, which is the social group whom identifies us. And then the out group is the them people. And so this happens all the time in a variety of different situations. The way to overcome that is, of course, education, intergroup contact, equal status, and then the jigsaw classroom, which is basically placing people into groups and making them work together on particular projects so that they can overcome some of these issues. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about a couple of things before I go on to finish out the notes. And how many of y'all have completed the jar of candy activity? Has everybody done it?
Never made it up here.
Oh, it hasn't made it up? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, just keep on passing it up. And then we're going to do one little quick activity. I need you all to get into groups of 3 and complete this activity. Let's see. We'll have, if you two can move over here, and then if y'all 3 will work together. And then we'll all 3 work together on this.
Are they working with?
Yeah, you're with us.
Do you have a spare one of those things? I'll focus on it.
Oh, sure.
So then I can see it. All right. Good discussion board post.
What is?
This prompt.
Oh.
Can I keep this?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not going to finish this.
That's okay.
No way. Okay. Do you want to show them this as well?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just asking how many candies are in this jar.
Okay.
Oh.
Here's the jar. There we go. So, but the whole PowerPoint we can put online, right?
Yes, I'll send that to you.
About how many slides do you think you have left?
Probably 10, maybe.
Okay. So, online students review that content.
Okay, are we close to being ready to talk about this? All right, so is everybody giving this person a sentence? Everybody written it down?
We wrote it down. We said it.
Okay, that's okay if you just said it. So you are kind of iffy. So give it some kind of sentence. I mean, just go ahead and put down some kind of number.
5 years.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. How many years did y'all give? 2? Okay, 2 here. What about here? 5? What about y'all?
10 with the possibility of parole.
Okay. Possibility of parole, okay. Yeah?
We do about a year or less.
Okay, a year or less.
I love how steering gets such short sentencing.
When you came up with 10, but I was thinking 3 because my thinking is they need to pay that money back, and if they're in jail, they can't pay it back.
Okay, alright. So the group that gave less than a year, and then the group that gave with the possibility of parole. Which person did y'all have?
71-year-old.
Okay. Yeah. Alright.
A 71-year-old man.
Okay. Alright, so the only difference between these is the actual person itself. I mean, there's a couple that have age differences because there's a 71-year-old person and then there's 31 or 36-year-old people. And so when you look at a particular person, you make a judgment based upon the way that they look. A lot of times it happens. And so all that I have done here, I'm going to show you this on the dot cam here, is you see one person who looks like a sweet old grandma, and you see one person who looks like a nice grandpa, and then you see some of these other people. Okay, so we've got this guy, and who had this guy?
We did.
Okay, and y'all gave him 5 years. Okay, did Samantha influence y'all? Because she's been in my class.
I would never.
Okay, and then we have this lady, and she got a fairly light sentence, 2 years. So, what's up with her? She kind of looks like a nice mom, yeah. And then we have Grandma, and Grandma. Sometimes people don't want to put Grandma away. Like, she's old, and people are like, oh, she looks happy and she looks nice. So, and then we've got Grandpa here. And he just looks nice and friendly, so a lot of times we're not going to give him the same sentence. And then we've got this guy here. You know what's really interesting? 10 years was Grandpa, but he got with the possibility of parole too. Okay, and then we've got this guy. Nobody had this guy, but oftentimes people will give him one of the harshest sentences. I think that's really interesting because I oftentimes get him as one of the most harsh sentences. And I don't know why, but I think that this is an interesting thing to look at. Okay, so most of you have completed the candy jar activity, and y'all did not fall for this. So I'm the one who wrote 63 in a dark blue number here. And so what happens a lot of times is we oftentimes will make a judgment about something based upon what other people have said. And so if you see mine at 63 here, then a lot of times people will look at it and say, you know what, I originally thought that it was more or less, but now I'm going to go with something that's closer. So y'all actually didn't do that. I mean, a lot of people put like in the hundreds, like 142, I have 115, 130. The actual number is 139. And so a lot of people did get close to that. But have you ever done that where you've made a comparison based upon what other people have put? I have. I've done that. I did that recently online. There was a activity that they did on Facebook, and they said how close, or like whoever gets the closest to this particular number is going to win. It was a really good prize. And they said, how many babies do you think that this particular gynecologist had delivered? And so I was like, oh, in my mind I had this like smaller number, and then I went and looked at all of the other responses, and I made a judgment based upon what other people had put on there, and I changed my mind because of that. And I know this stuff, and I did it. And my number that was my original number that I thought beforehand was the one that was probably closer in reality. But anyway, I changed it because of that. And so we're basically out of time, and so I haven't gotten to the rest of these things, but I will post this on, I'll give this to Dr. Robertson, and she will post it online. But anyway, I'm open for questions. If anybody has any questions, feel free to stay and ask me questions. But thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Always have fun.